WattCycle is a relatively new name in lithium iron phosphate batteries. They offer a range of 12, 24, 36, and 48 volt batteries and seem to concentrate more on the value end of the market. In 12 volt batteries, they start with 8 amp hour batteries and range up to 300 amp hours. None of their batteries offer heating, though many of them offer both low temperature cutoff and Bluetooth communications. The batteries that we're going to take a look at today are their 12.8 volt 100 amp hour batteries. WattCycle calls them trolling motor batteries, though I don't really know why. They are general purpose 100 amp hour deep cycle batteries, suitable for trolling motor applications certainly, but also house loads and other typical applications for deep cycle batteries. These do have Bluetooth communications as well as low temperature cutoff and are a nominal group 24 sized battery. These batteries list for $219 and are, I think, a very solid value, but we'll dig into them a little bit, take them apart, see how they're built, and then put them through their paces and see how they hold up to some rather stout loads. We're also going to see how they handle charging and take a look at whether they are prone to the charge MOSFET disconnect behavior that we've seen from some other batteries. All right, let's tear this baby down. So, best guess, there's some glue in, it's an overlap with glue holding it down. Get rid of the handle. Try and work a sharp tool in between there. Go grab one. Okay, that's positive. So we're inside the unit. We've got what looks to be a fairly straightforward BMS. We've got no gauge markings we can read, but those look like, oh, there's a gauge marking right there. Number 8 gauge wire, so doubled up number 8 to the terminal, and then this looks like number 2 probably. No gauge marking on that I can see. And then we have some unmolested. So interesting, the cells are in on their sides. We have unmodified QR codes, which is a good thing. Go ahead and try and read that QR. Come on. There we go. Okay. The codes. This is a first for me. The codes are not decoding. The QR codes are not decoding. Yep. Getting a error that 15th and 17th letters, 15th to 17th letters are wrong. So it won't decode the manufacturer, the type, or any other information. It's decoding out to a manufacturing date of the 17th of November of 2020. A little skeptical of that, or at least I hope I'm skeptical of that. But what we do see here is a decent amount of cell compression. These are 4 100 amp hour, 3.2 volt cells, so getting us our 12 volt nominal, 100 amp hour capacity. It sort of looks like one of the typical inexpensive BMSs, but you don't know till you take it all apart, do you? Let's go ahead and take it apart. Bluetooth is off. We've just got our temperature sensors left, of which there appear to be 2. I'm not 100% convinced I want to try and pull those just yet. So let's take the BMS off. Okay, there's the BMS released. This is, well, we can certainly tell already, a very minimal BMS. Lightweight, probably relatively few FETs. Not going to stand up to tremendous amounts of energy throughput, but probably just fine at the battery's rated throughput. Oops. Boy, we aren't going to learn much about that BMS, are we? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 2 banks of 6 FETs, presumably 6 charge, 6 discharge. And some unused terminals, but we don't really know what they are because everything is covered in epoxy. Interesting. All right, we are gonna do some performance testing on the battery. Right now, I've got a 50 amp load going against the battery, or roughly 0.5 C. Warmest part of the battery appears to be showing about 80 degrees Fahrenheit right now. Also looking at the temperatures per the app, warmest temperature in the app is the MOSFET itself, MOSFET temperature sensor itself at 27.7 C. We're going to let this go at about 50 amps of discharge for the next 20-25 minutes. See if we start to see the temperature stabilize. The MOSFETs are continuing to climb a little bit at a time, so we're now up to 27.9 C, now 28 C. So that's like 82 degrees right now. So just for a little comparison, we're seeing about 81 degrees, 81.5 degrees is the peak temperature coming from the thermal camera looking at the BMS and the top of the cells. We're up to 28.6 from the MOSFET reading in the app itself. 28.6 C is 83.5 degrees Fahrenheit. So we're just going to continue to let this go for a while. We do see all of our temperatures continue to climb, although fairly slowly, and all still very acceptable and relatively low temps. So 82 degrees according to the thermal camera, 29.1 from the FETs, or 84.5 via the app. We're seeing in the app a very small cell delta at 4/1000ths of a volt. Definitely good and strong performance there. Continue to see 49.7 amps coming out of the battery. So, almost right exactly at 50 amps. FETs just continue to get a little bit warmer and a little bit warmer. Still nothing big, but we are up to 29.3, or just shy of 85 degrees. Okay, now been running for about 15 minutes. FETs are showing 31.8 degrees Celsius, or 89.25 degrees Fahrenheit. The thermal camera is showing about 88 degrees. So I would say everything pretty well agrees. Battery continues to run. It's cool to the touch. You can barely feel it. You see my hand showing up way, way warmer than any part of the battery. So certainly a pretty positive sign about how the battery is handling the current coming out of it right now. Just continue to let this run. We'll probably let it go another 5 or so minutes. Probably get it out to about 20 minutes. I'm certainly not seeing any reason to be overly concerned about the ability of the battery to produce energy until it's depleted at 50 amps. We'll then take it to 100 amps, and then we'll take it to 120 amps, assuming we don't get to a disconnect before then. Frankly, I'm a little skeptical about whether this BMS can deliver 120 amps continuous. I know that's what WattCycle rated it for, but that's an awful lot to ask for out of a battery this size. Not just the BMS, but the cells themselves. That's a lot of energy coming out of 100 amp hour prismatics. So we shall see. Okay, it's now been 25 minutes. We are seeing 33.1, 33.2 degrees Celsius, 91.75 degrees Fahrenheit from the MOSFETs, about 90 degrees Fahrenheit from the thermal camera. Battery is down a quarter, so we've been doing this, as I say, for about a half hour. Very much no reason to think the battery couldn't continue to do this until capacity is depleted. Hoping we're about to stabilize on temperature, so we're going to give it another 5 minutes, let it run to 30 minutes. Okay, so now we are right about at the 30-minute mark. We have been doing this for a half an hour. We have pulled in excess of a quarter of the capacity out of the battery. We are at 33.6 degrees Celsius on the FETs, 92.5 degrees. We're showing 91.2 on the thermal camera. So again, very, very controlled temps. No problem there. I think we're going to go ahead and increase our load. So we're going to turn on the space heater. So we are right at 100 amps, just over. And watch those temps kind of shoot up. We're up to 39 degrees on the MOSFET temp, which is 102. And we are indeed seeing all the temps climb pretty rapidly. So no great surprise, we're asking an extraordinary amount of energy out of a 100 amp hour battery. We're asking for its entire capacity in an hour, just slightly over. However, the battery is rated for 120 amps of continuous power output. Strikes me as a somewhat optimistic rating, but let's see. So we are at 101 amps of output, and we are up to 42.7 degrees Celsius, 109 degrees Fahrenheit. We see that climb occurring also on the thermal camera, which is now showing 105 degrees. So definitely climbing, and climbing pretty rapidly. I believe WattCycle actually rates this battery for 220 amps for a relatively short period of time, and up to 400 amps for 0.3 seconds. Yeah, so 220 amps for less than 6 seconds, and 400 amp peak for less than 0.3 seconds. So it's got a pretty beefy rating on it. Again, to me that rating almost seems optimistic, but it is holding up pretty nicely. We are at 48 degrees Celsius now, which corresponds to 118.4 Fahrenheit. I want to let this stabilize a little bit before we go ahead and kick the load up to 120 for at least a brief period. Okay, been another couple of minutes. We are up to 66.2 degrees Celsius, 151 degrees Fahrenheit, showing 135 on the thermal camera. And other than things getting warmer, battery continues to operate pretty normally. I do notice the cells have gotten a little bit warm. They are showing about 97 degrees Fahrenheit. We are up to 69.9 degrees Celsius, or 158 degrees Fahrenheit. Really, we've sort of seen the thermal camera top out at about 130 degrees. Battery's down to 37% state of charge. Battery cells are up to 37, so 99 degrees. They're definitely taking on some heat. And sort of like I mentioned before, we are not seeing the MOSFET temps climb very quickly anymore. Holding steady at 70.1 or 158 right now. Just ticking into 70.2, but much, much slower moves now. So sort of stabilized in temp for the most part, I think. I would not want my battery running here all day long, but no fear, because the battery can only run here for about an hour, because we're going to pull all of the capacity out of the battery in an hour. Right, it's been a couple of minutes. Indeed, we have plateaued. We are still at 70.3 or 158.5 degrees Fahrenheit. So now seems like a good time to go ahead and throw in another 20 amps of load and see what we get. So turn that on. There's another 20 amps. Now drawing 122.3 or just over rated capacity. Temperatures are climbing once again. We are up to 71 degrees Celsius now, which is 159.8, almost 160 degrees. And just like that, we are to 71.5 or 160.7 degrees. We see, what do we see? 145 looking kind of right at the, at where the FETs are. Now up to 157, looking right at the FETs. So in line with that, those hotter temperatures we were seeing, we are up to 76.6 77 degrees Celsius, which is 170.6. So things are definitely warm in the battery. We're just getting to the point where it's not real comfortable to keep your hand on the heatsink or the connections themselves. I'd say the entirety of the battery is pretty darn warm. Seeing that reflected with some 155 degree peak temps. I'm gonna just go ahead and increase our load a little bit. So dropped for a moment there, but we're gonna put 30 amps of load back on here just to see how it holds up to well overrated load. So we're now drawing 137.8 amps out of the battery. We are at basically 80 degrees Celsius, which is 176 degrees Fahrenheit. Thermal camera is seeing some pretty darn warm temps as well. And the temps just keep climbing. I'm a little curious to know where the disconnect is going to be for the FET temp in the BMS. We'll see if we get it hot enough to find it. The battery cells themselves are at 40.7 right now, which is 105 degrees Fahrenheit. Certainly matches about what they feel like. They feel warm, but not outrageous. And we're up to 81.5 or 178.7 degrees Celsius. Now up to 82, so probably pushing right at 180 degrees. All right, we are at 87 degrees Celsius, 188.6 degrees Fahrenheit, 18% state of charge, drawing 139 amps. We're gonna run out of battery here pretty quickly, out of charge, so I'm gonna get really obnoxious and increase our loads rather significantly. We are now drawing 180, 190, 200 amps out of the battery. So pushing that up, we're at 90 degrees Celsius, or 194 degrees on the MOSFETs. The battery itself has definitely come up in temperature as well. It's up to 42.7, 42.8, which is about 109 degrees Fahrenheit. We are seeing everything get quite warm on thermal as well. I see a peak temp of 194 there. We're up to 95 C, and now we see the, there we go, okay. So it just shut off with a MOSFET temp of 97 degrees Celsius. Hard to argue with that. So 97 Celsius, just for grins, is 206.6 Fahrenheit. We are approaching the point of boiling water, so seems an awfully reasonable thing that it did go ahead and shut down. I'm gonna take some of our loads off so that when the battery does recover and turn itself back on, but it's coming down in temp. Yeah, that heat sink's hot. You don't want to touch that for very long. But as long as we're looking at this, worth calling out that even after that pretty extreme discharge, we've got 13 1/1000ths of a volt of variation among the cells, so that's looking pretty good. All right, looks like the battery has come back online. I've got all of my loads turned off now. So we're, fairly normal. Voltage is good. Everything looks pretty normal from the battery perspective. The MOSFET is already down to 80 degrees Celsius, which, might sound cool compared to almost 100, but that is still 176 degrees Fahrenheit. So also, it looks like the cells themselves continue to sit pretty hot, about 110 degrees. They feel pretty warm. When we look at them with the thermal sees them actually a little warmer at 115 degrees Fahrenheit. So we definitely drove a whole lot of heat into this entire battery. Gonna let it cool off a little bit, but I would say that it took 120 amps didn't shut the battery down, 137 amps didn't shut the battery down. It took my doing something pretty stupid, and I think almost 200 amps, or maybe even over 200 amps, in order to get the battery to shut down with the thermal out of parameter on the MOSFETs, and well, it should have. We were definitely abusing it. The other thing to note is that was a rate of discharge that would have had all of the energy depleted out of the battery in under half an hour. So we were talking about some fairly extreme loads that we were putting on it. I'd say that this test has been pretty successful, and I'll keep looking at different ways of abusing the battery, but looks pretty darn good to me. Somewhat recently, we've begun noticing batteries are turning off their charge FETs or stopping charge as the battery approaches full charge. The reasoning appears to be in the interest of trying to protect the cells, make sure that they are not held at a high voltage for an extended period of time. But the results are a little bit unpredictable. I've done some previous videos where we've captured some pretty high transient voltage spikes, 15, 16, 17 volts, resulting from a large transformer providing the charge source suddenly seeing its charge destination come offline. The WattCycle batteries appear to be doing very much the same thing. I've noticed that in the app, they are showing a warning when the cells hit 3.5 volts, well under the typical 3.65 volt cell maximums that we typically see. And they are disconnecting. They're also showing a pack warning at 14 volts and disconnecting well below that. Okay, so to illustrate what can happen when the battery disconnects charging, I have the inverter charger charging the battery right now. According to its output, it's putting out about 65 amps. It's set to a 14.4 volt absorption, and the multimeter is going to capture the spike that may occur as the inverter sees the disconnect event. So right now we are no warnings going on the battery. It's about 98% charged. At this rate, it won't take long to get it up to its disconnect threshold. So we're at 3.436 for the highest cell. That's ticking up steadily. As we get over 3.5, we'll see the warnings turn on. And then as we get above 3.6, we should see a battery disconnect. The charger is configured, as I mentioned, for 14.4 volt absorption. So plenty of power there in order to trigger the disconnect. Right now, the charger is seeing that it's outputting 14.1. We're seeing about 13.9 into the battery. No great surprise there. We don't have sense leads on the inverter, so it's just measuring what it's outputting. We are 2 amps or less away from fully charged, so this should start to spike pretty quickly. Indeed, we're now at 3.45 for the highest cell, and still rising pretty quickly. So we want to watch this max value on the multimeter. Right now it's showing 13.95 volts, which is in line with the power coming into the voltage coming into the battery right now. But we do know that when the battery disconnects charging, we expect to see that transformer overrun its voltage target because it doesn't have enough smoothing, enough capacitors in the front end to smooth that curve when it goes from having a place to dump all of its energy to nowhere to go with it. The other thing is, because the disconnects are occurring at a relatively low voltage and not waiting until charge acceptance has declined, we're dumping these transformers when they're pretty ramped up. They're putting out a whole lot of energy. So I do expect to see that we may see a slightly higher curve. So we're now a higher spike, excuse me. We've got all 4 batteries into their warnings for both cell over voltage and pack over voltage. Again, the pack is barely at 14.1 volts, so this is occurring pretty early. Top cell is at 3.57, and we're still accepting 45 amps. We haven't opened yet, but we're just about to open up the charge FET, would be my guess. 3.6 volts for the top cell, and just keep watching it. Any second now, I expect we'll see that charge MOSFET switch off or go open. There it goes. Interesting. So we did not capture a spike that time. Oh, We did capture the spike. It was just slow for the meter to reflect it. So we saw a spike to 17.3 volts as the transformer tried to scale itself down when it stopped having a place to go with the energy that it was generating. So that's the danger. Larger transformer could spike even higher. 17.5 volts is 17.3 volts is definitely higher than you would like to see on that DC circuit. And generally just having the charged FET disconnect is a source of noise and potential trouble in your system. Okay, so we've had a pretty good opportunity to dig into these batteries, get a real sense of what they're all about. Physical construction looks pretty good. The BMS is not super beefy from a physical construction perspective, but we just saw it handle a tremendous amount of current running through it and manage a whole lot of energy. For the most part, I really like almost everything that I saw. I am not wild about the protection settings and the low voltages at which both cell and pack protections kick in. In practice and in reality, I think that's probably relatively easily managed using an absorption voltage at or below 14 volts. But it's certainly something to keep an eye on. As has been said a fair amount in the marketplace recently, this does appear to be a direction that especially the value-oriented batteries are going. Because manufacturers offer such long warranties on their batteries, they need to protect themselves and ensure that the batteries are not being abused, that they're not being overcharged or held at a high voltage for an extended period of time. And the way they appear to be doing that is by disconnecting the charged FETs. It's hard for me to get in line with that or fall in love with that approach, but it is what it is. And at $219 a battery for a 100 amp hour battery with the kind of throughput that we saw and the kind of current handling capabilities we saw, these are pretty compelling batteries, pretty good looking batteries.